darkness is not an affirmative force. It simply reoccupies the space vacated by the light.
This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
It should be uncomfortable for a believer to live as a hypocrite.
Delivering people out of the bondage of mainstream media and the philosophies of this world.
God has called you and me to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment. Let's not miss our moment.
And now, the Hamilton Corner.
Good evening. Welcome to this Friday on your way to the weekend edition of the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. I am your host, Abraham Hamilton III. And have you heard the news yet? What news am I talking about? Well, this morning, the GDP numbers were released, and guess what? Those numbers show that America's gross domestic product has grown by 4.1%. You heard me right, 4.1%. And it wasn't too long ago that I remember, a former president by the name of Barack Hussein Obama saying that 2% GDP growth was the new normal, that we should expect, anticipate, recalibrate our expectations of the American economy to settle for 2% GDP growth. And now all of a sudden, one election, new Oval Office occupant, and bam, we're at 4.1%. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a continuation of the good news. Good news to hear. And the questions that I have now are, could it go higher? Could we see more? Will we now begin to see some of the increase in wages that many people have been anticipating for quite some time and that many desire? I think the markers are all pointing in the right direction. I mean, you add that into the news I shared here on this program with the United States being ranked number one again in terms of the world's most competitive economy. The economic numbers are all pointing in the right direction. I think the last thing that people are waiting to see is an increase in wages. And once that happens, that's almost like a game, set, and match on the economic front for what's happening here in our country. Well, so I am so glad that you tuned in to the program. We will start the program off the way we always start the program off, which is by turning to the Word of God. We must always make sure that the Bible doesn't become just a dust collecting mantelpiece object in our homes, but that if we have that we have Bibles, should all have Bibles. The Bible has been, will be, and it has been, it is, and will continue to be the number one selling book in the world. But the question is not, do you have one? Do you use it? We want to be not hearers of the word only, but doers of the word. So we want to make sure we use the word of God to navigate all the issues that we engage in on a regular basis. And to that end, I'm going to turn us to a very, very familiar passage of scripture in Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20. Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20, where we have the scriptures that refer to the Great Commission. I'll read them and then we'll talk about them a little bit. Here we go. Matthew 28, verse 16. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age, Obviously, verse 16, there are 11 disciples mentioned there because Judas is no longer among the ranks of the disciples. But one thing that I always point out when I read these scriptures is verse 17, that here you have in Matthew 28, verse 17, that among these disciples who are noted, these are guys who have walked with Jesus for the 3 years he had been on the earth. They have seen his ministry. They have heard his preaching. They have witnessed his miracles. They have even heard his prophetic utterance about going to the cross, and even the prophetic utterances about him being resurrected. And now here they are standing on the mountain that Jesus told them to meet him on, while Jesus is in resurrected form. Yet verse 17 notes that some of these robust, august disciples doubted. Even in this moment, which is instructive for you and I believe, because here you have those guys with that type of experience, that type of resume. For them to have a moment in their history when they had some doubt should give encouragement to you and I, because you see, their doubt didn't remain doubt. Many of these same guys, the Gospel of John records that after Jesus' crucifixion, that they were locked in a room for fear of the Jews, afraid that they would face the same consequences, the same execution that Jesus faced, the same type of execution. So they were hiding. Then the Bible shows us that the Spirit of God was poured out upon them, that the Spirit of God indwelled them, and these same guys who were afraid to go out in Jerusalem are now preaching in this town square of the very same city. That's because when the Spirit of God fills us, we get boldness. So the instruction and the encouragement from that is, no matter what your history may be, your history is not a predictor, nor is the exclusive determiner of what your future will become. And I think that is good news. And here we go, though, in verse 18, when Jesus conveys the fact that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him. Yet it is this same Jesus who sends us into his harvest field. Remember, when it was said, pray ye that laborers, pray to the Lord of the harvest, that laborers will be sent into his harvest field. He is the Lord of the harvest, and the harvest field is his. And in light of that reality, then we see here in these scriptures in Matthew 28 that Jesus gives us the authority by which we go out to execute the Great Commission is Jesus's very own authority. And he explains to us that the Great Commission is evangelism. No. Evangelism is a vital and critical component of the Great Commission, but it is not the sum total of the Great Commission. The Great Commission's instruction is to make disciples. That is, to make disciplined learners, disciplined Christ followers. And Jesus said it himself, teaching them. Who is the them? The disciples, the new disciples, teaching them to obey all things that I've commanded you. You see, the commission to make disciples of all ethnos, it says in all nations of all ethnos. Mark 16:15 says, go into all the world proclaiming the good news. That instruction to make disciples of all ethnos requires us to convey, those of us who have been discipled, the way that the process goes, Jesus saves us and makes us disciples in order that we would go out and make additional disciples of Jesus Christ. Well, Jesus explains that the totality of the discipleship making process is to make disciplined learners to obey all that Christ has commanded. Folks, all is Genesis to Revelation. Everything that Jesus has commanded. Then we know, based on John's gospel, that the Lord tells us that he dispatches his Spirit. The Spirit of God is sent to remind us of everything, that Jesus taught, to convict us of sin, to lead us and guide us into all truth. So we have the full buffet table, if you will, the full table laid out for what the discipleship making process is supposed to be. And then we have the duration, the time period that we're supposed to conduct this Great Commission or execute this Great Commission. And verse 20 says it plainly, that Jesus is with us to the end of the age. Folks, this doesn't stop until Jesus comes back. Now, one of the things that is often either overlooked or misunderstood is that this Great Commission is given to us. And those of us who are disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ, there is a context for that discipleship. Acts chapter 17, verses 26 and 27 says that the Lord determined the boundaries of our habitation and the times in which we would live before time. So the fact that I am an American citizen at this time, that I was born on the outer edges of millennial, I don't know if a lot of people know that, but I'm an upper level millennial in terms of age. It's crazy. It's hard for me to even say that, but it's the truth. All right. But having said that the Lord has set a context, has determined the boundaries of our habitation that we are to execute this Great Commission in. So when you understand that, it forces one to consider and to evaluate that, wait a minute, it was God's sovereign design that he allowed me to be born and to be alive in the 21st century and to live in a nation whose governmental structure is a constitutional republic with democratic features, that being in a land where the government is of the people, by the people, for the people, where the people have a say-so in the makeup, in the constituency, in the nature of the government? Yes. And I use this to convey to people that it is not the sum total of our calling, our ministerial calling before the Lord, but having the privilege of American citizenship and to participate in the formation of our government should be something we approach, as the scripture tells us, do all things heartily as unto the Lord. We should discharge our civic duties, our civic responsibilities as unto the Lord as well, which means just as we are facing this midterm election process, it is the Christian's responsibility to engage as an informed voter. What type of candidates will put us in a position as a nation to move us closer to being a nation who is blessed because the nation's God is the Lord? What type of candidates would move us closer to the place where we can say our government consists of people who understand righteousness exalts a nation? Sure, we want sound fiscal policies. Sure, we want to have trade deals with the European Union and other nations that move towards zero tariffs. But those things are not more important than understanding understanding that righteousness exalts a people, but sin is a reproach to any nation. That's not more important than that. So understanding that, we get a picture of how our civic engagement should carry with it the aroma of the presence of God. Our civic engagement shouldn't carry with it the due diligence of those of us who have been captured by the power of the blood of Jesus Christ. Yes, this is a part of it. And I make this reference many times. Galatians chapter 3, verse 26 and 27 talks about the law being a schoolmaster, being a trainer of the heart, a trainer of the mind, a trainer of the conscience, until there is a receptivity to the Spirit of God. Changes in the law always results in changes in the people governed by that law. It takes longer than an encounter with Jesus Christ, but over time, it results in those changes. I've used examples before. I'll share them with you guys here. 1967, Loving versus Virginia. Prior to that Supreme Court decision, many people in America felt like individuals of different skin colors should never be married. Loving versus Virginia is handed down. Change in the law resulted over time in changes in the heart. Today, you have multi-ethnic marriages all over the place, and we as a nation stand to rejoice. Of course, there are a couple crazies who are off in the margins of society, but we as an entire American populace look at them and say, man, y'all are crazy. Changes in the law resulted in a change in the heart of the people. 1973, Roe versus Wade, January 22nd, a date in my mind that shall forever live in infamy. That Alveda King is putting out a movie about it right now, Roe versus Wade, telling the backstory of Norma McCorvey and sharing all of the Ann Reed, Jeff's wife, shared it like this: the back alley shenanigans that resulted in a lie being foisted on the American people. After Roe versus Wade was decided, we now live in a day where nearly half the country believes not only that it's morally okay to kill a baby in utero, but they will fight to the death for it to be a right funded by federal tax dollars. And then one of the more recent decisions, 2015, Obergefell versus Hodges, that granted same-sex marriage rights across the country, according to the legal opinion. We can debate that if you want to. But that being said, that resulted in an uptick of the numbers of people who believe same-sex marriage should be okay. When just before that decision, 30-plus states amended their state constitution or passed legislation to reflect a biblical view on marriage. What I'm saying is that if the light absents itself from public engagement, guess what happens? Y'all know what happens. Darkness reoccupies. Darkness is not an affirmative force. It just thrives in the absence of the light. And if we are light bearers, we should carry that light bearing into our civic responsibilities.
Shining light into the darkness. This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. And I am so excited to have my guest on the line, who is none other than Ken Cuccinelli, who is the former Attorney General of the state of Virginia and was the state's 2013 Republican gubernatorial candidate. He currently serves as the president of the Senate Conservatives Fund. Thank you so much for joining me today on the program, Ken Cuccinelli.
Oh, my pleasure. Good to be with you.
Now, I want to start this interview off because my audience is very familiar with the fact that I have very little patience for the group of people I call Republicrats. You know, and if you want to know what Republicrats are, these are people who campaign as Republicans, but for some reason they arrive in Washington, D.C., suffering under a bat of Potomac fever, and they govern like regressives. And I have little patience for that, because all too often there are lots of Christian people who have been ensnared in the ruse, thinking they're voting for conservatives, but ultimately they sometimes find out all too late that they put their support behind somebody who is a Republican. And so in you, Mr. Cuccinelli, and the Senate Conservatives Fund, I find like-minded brethren. So would you please introduce our audience, for those who may not be aware, and for those who are aware, what is the Senate Conservatives Fund and what do you guys do?
Sure. The Senate Conservatives Fund was started almost 10 years ago by then Senator Jim DeMint, after he got completely fed up with Mitch McConnell and the powers that be doing the same old thing year in, year out, including lying to voters about what they were actually going to do and what they actually believed, as reflected in what they do. And the best story is he was finally sitting in a caucus meeting. They were talking about races, and they were talking about the guy was a Republican, now he's a Democrat in Florida, Krista.
His name escapes me.
Running against Marco Rubio. He was the former governor, and everybody, of course this is the guy, blah, blah, blah. And Jim DeMint said, what about this Marco Rubio guy? And they literally, the room laughed out loud. Wow. And that was the last straw for him. And as they say, you can look at Marco Rubio, the rest is history.
Yeah.
Now, for those who don't remember, the Mitch McConnell candidate is now a Democrat in Congress from Florida. So there is a perfect example of your Republicrat.
Yeah.
And it may be now he's a Demublican. I don't know. But Senate Conservatives Fund has never sacrificed two things: our high standard for principles, and the fact that we are a full spectrum. We are the largest full spectrum conservative PAC out there. We are pro-life. We are pro-marriage. We are pro-religious liberty. In addition to all the economic issues and freedom issues that you see with a lot of other groups, including Tea Party groups, we're also strong on the Second Amendment. So we literally cover the whole waterfront. We're the only large PAC that does, and we have a very strong track record. 11 of the senators in the U.S. Senate are SCF-endorsed senators, including people like Ted Cruz, who's up this year, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, mentioned Marco Rubio, and of those 11, only one is really a mistake. Flake the mistake. He went from a noun to a verb, but he's leaving. And he's leaving because he was afraid of his own grassroots, and it would have been the first time we ever opposed one of our previous nominees. But what organizations can point to a track record of over 90%? We can do that, and that high standard has been our hallmark for years, that and fighting leadership. So whether it's Mitch McConnell in the Senate, we're also supporting Jim Jordan for House Speaker over on the House side. So that's our history. That's our history.
And that is a phenomenal history. And on this program, I've asked some callers to say this, and I've also recommended, instead of giving money to the RNC, give money directly to candidates that you've researched and you believe in.
Absolutely.
But in addition to that, I would commend SCF to my listeners. And the website is SenateConservatives.com, SenateConservatives.com, because you guys do significant amount of diligence finding conservatives and racists all over the country, because you are committed to populating our Congress with people who are not conservatives in name only, but people who actually believe in conservatism in terms of its principles and its values.
Well, and not only that, let's take one of our candidates this year. We've got John James is coming up on a tough primary in Michigan in about a week and a half. If you donate to John James through our website, we pay the credit card fee, that 3 or 4 or 5% fee. So he gets, you donate $100, he gets $100. If you donate to him through his own website, he gets about $96, because he has to pay the credit card fee. We raise separate money, and we'd appreciate donations for it, to make sure that every penny people donate to a candidate goes to a candidate. There aren't many PACs there's actually no other PAC that I know of that can say that.
Yeah, I agree. There's none that I know of that does that exact same thing. Now, I want to pick up on something you just mentioned. As you said, Senate Conservatives Fund is supporting Jim Jordan for House Speaker. The American Family Association, we are too. We sent out our action alert on that as soon as the information hit. What do you think the impact will be with Jim Jordan now throwing his hat in the ring and couching it in these types of terms? Should the Republicans maintain a majority in the House in the midterm elections, that he will run for House Speaker?
Right, and that is a tough question itself. Jim is going to be campaigning for candidates across the country to try to help hold the Republican majority, but he's also now announced that if they do hold it, he is going to pursue the speakership. And this is a guy who is the 4-year high school champion wrestler in Ohio, 2-time national champion wrestler at Wisconsin in NCAA Division I. This is a disciplined, committed individual who shares our beliefs. When was the last time we saw leadership like this with this kind of personal track record, not just the leadership he's provided in Congress? And the perfect guy to wrestle the Dems to the ground. And he is well worth getting behind. And I'm so glad AFA is in on it. You all are the biggest social and Christian conservative group that I know of that's supporting Jim Jordan. There are a lot of other groups that are sitting it out in the religious conservative space. It's a bad decision on their part. Some of them want to be cozy with leadership. People like National Right to Life, for instance, they always want to be friendly with the leadership, and Jim is taking on the leadership.
Yeah.
And if you like the way Congress is working, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, there are plenty of candidates for you. If you don't think Congress is working right, Jim Jordan is the only guy who changes the way it works. He's the only guy. I
agree with that. And I told you off the air that I am not satisfied with the way that Congress is working.
Right.
And I believe yes, and we have a unique opportunity now. I think this is the time. This is the time that we may not get again in our lifetimes to try to wrench back from this consistent push leftward, no matter what party occupies the White House. It seems like the nation continues marching in the same direction, which is the wrong direction. And I think we have an opportunity now to reverse that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And also, you're going to hear Jim talk about things like the fact that only a few people run Congress. Well, the 750,000 people that elect every congressman would like the chance to propose amendments. They'd like to be represented. And Jim is looking at opening that up and democratizing it. So that's going to mean there are going to be compromises that we might not like, but it also means we're finally going to get our voice heard. And if Jim can win, and everybody should call their Republican congressman and do two things: call their district office and call their Washington office and tell them both you want them to support Jim Jordan, and to call you back when they decide, so they can tell you whether they're actually going to do what you want them to do. And then have your spouse make those same 2 phone calls so you get 4 votes all at once. But don't just tell them what you want. Hold them accountable. Tell them to call you back when they decide.
That is really, really, really good advice. Really good advice. And I know that the Hamilton Corners audience members, they are going to take you up on that advice. Now, I want to dig into a little bit of the races. I know that Senate Conservatives Fund is active in races all across the country. And this is a time where, especially in the Senate, and I guess I'll ask this question first, is the Senate Conservatives Fund, it should be obvious based on the name, but I'll ask the question anyway. Are you guys focused solely on the United States Senate, or are you involved in the Congress as a whole in terms of participating in the races?
Well, of course, we talked about the Jordan leadership effort. We are the Senate Conservatives Fund. It is our priority, but on some occasions there are House members we get in for who have been warriors, or we expect to be warriors for our perspective. One of those in this cycle is Dave Bratt, who famously unseated Majority Leader Eric Cantor, who stood in the way of conservatives so many times and was a moneybags guy. I mean, and Dave rallied the grassroots with virtually no help, to win. We helped him hang on to it in the general election at SCF. And this year, he is one of the major targets of the left. And a lot of those Eric Cantor Republicans in Virginia, and I can tell you as a Virginian, are sitting on their hands. They want Dave to lose. They want Dave to lose. These are so-called Republicans, your Republicrats.
Yes.
And in a district that leans pretty comfortably Republican, when you have that kind of Republican undermining of such a solid character like Dave Bratt, it puts him at risk. So we're helping him in addition to our 7 Senate candidates. This is the best Senate map in a midterm election for conservatives in yours and my lifetime.
Yeah.
It's never been better on the map. And so we are focused first and foremost on the Senate, but we don't want to leave Dave Bratt behind. He's done so much for us. He's fought so hard for us. We really feel like we need to stand with people like that.
Now, just one more question on Dave Bratt. Is it the possibility in Bratt's district that there could be a similar issue as it was in the Virginia gubernatorial election where Northam just recently was elected governor there?
Well, I'm pretty sure Gillespie won Dave's district by a point or two.
Okay.
But look, we had a serious blue wave here in Virginia in 2017. We have odd-year elections. We're a rare state in that regard. 8 years before that, I won in a red wave. I won in 2009 for Attorney General. I got 58% of the vote in Virginia. And of course, went on to be the first to sue an Obamacare and sue the EPA and so forth. But we are heavily affected in Virginia by the mood out of Washington. And we have a huge chunk of federal workers in Northern Virginia, where I live, that are not about limited government per se. And so the Republican message, a conservative version of Republican message, can be a harder sell here sometimes. So, but obviously I proved it can work.
Yeah.
And Dave is in the middle of the state. He's right in the middle. He touches Richmond and points north and west. It is a pretty good district, but Dave Bratt has been a major target of both the liberal Democrats, who are really fired up and going after him, and of the passive moderate Republicans who just as soon see Dave lose. And so Dave is really fighting on his own this cycle. He could use donations, prayers, support of everybody who's listening to us. Dave Bratt is he means something beyond just his seat.
Yeah.
The Democrats, he's a head they'd love to put on the wall, you know, even though they don't do that, but we're the hunters. But nonetheless, that is how they view that race, and they're coming after it hard. And Spanberger, his Democrat opponent, is going to raise a lot of left-wing grassroots money, and we really need to help support him. All while at the Senate Conservatives Fund, we look at the opportunity to pick up 2, 3, 4, 5 more Senate seats, and not just pick up Republican Senate seats, but get conservatives into the U.S. Senate. That's really the only thing that's going to change the direction of America, is more conservatives, not more Republicans, on Capitol Hill, and that's what we focus on. That's what we're focused on.
Very well said. And you mentioned previously that this is the most favorable Senate map that we've seen in a generation for conservatives, because you have literally about 24 Senate seats where Democrats are fighting to retain incumbency status, where only 10 Republicans. And then among those, you have 8 to 10 states where President Trump carried the states, and 5 to 7 of them that President Trump carried in overwhelming numbers. So tell the listeners a little bit about that map.
Yeah, absolutely. The Democrats, over half of their caucus, this is amazing, 25 of their 49 members, and I count the independents as Democrats because that's what they are defending their seats. And 10 of those are in states Trump won.
Yes.
So, and some of them by extraordinary margins. I mean, Patrick Morrisey is running against Joe Manchin in West Virginia. And if I remember my numbers correctly, President Trump won West Virginia by something like 42 points.
Yeah.
That's just inconceivable to me in
42
Virginia,
points.
but that's the environment. And Patrick Morrisey has been a real leader of an attorney general. He's fought for the Second Amendment. He's fought the whole transgender bathroom malarkey that came out of the Obama administration. And that sounds obvious to your listeners, but let me tell you a lot of squishy attorneys general don't want to touch those issues. Oh, my wine and cheese people don't really want me to bite on that. Patrick didn't back down from it. He dove in. He was a leader on it. He certainly fought the EPA. Part of how he got elected, he unseated a 20-year incumbent attorney general in West Virginia, a guy who wouldn't defend the coal industry.
Wow.
In West Virginia.
Let me jump in right there because the music is on. We're coming to a break. And if you stay on with me for the next segment, we'll continue on discussing Patrick Morrisey as well as some other states that the Senate Conservatives Fund is actively engaged in, attempting to move the Senate not just to republicanism, but to conservatism, which is a monumental task. You don't want to miss the rest of this interview. Stay close on the Hamilton Corner.
The Hamilton Corner podcast and 1-minute commentaries are available at afr.net and urbanfamilytalk.com. Back to the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. My guest is Ken Cuccinelli. And before we went to the break, we were discussing the Patrick Morrisey race against Joe Manchin in West Virginia and how it's amazing how Patrick Morrisey was able to win his attorney general race previously over a candidate who wouldn't even defend the coal industry in West Virginia. If you would, Ken, pick up right where you left off.
Sure. Patrick is, the bigger item there is that the guy that Patrick beat was there 20 years. I mean, wow. It wasn't like other people didn't try as well, but Patrick was the only guy who pulled it off. He beat him by only about 16,000 votes in 2012 and hung on in re-election. The newspapers there are owned by the guy he beat in 2012, several of them. And so you can guess how favorable they are to Patrick. So we really need to help him out. This is a real opportunity to flip a seat to a real conservative Republican with a track record of performance, even when it's awkward and difficult. And those are the kinds of tests we like to see. So, and for any of these candidates, people can find them at SenateConservatives.com. That's SenateConservatives.com. We'll link you to any of them. And as I said earlier, if you're willing to donate to them, we'll pay the transaction cost. So they'll get every single penny people donate. That's the biggest thing people can do for these candidates is even if it's just $10, $20, it all adds up because I'm telling you, these incumbents who they're trying to unseat are going to the PACs in Washington, and they've got Chuck Schumer behind them. They're getting big checks. We need a lot of little ones.
That's right.
And that's what we try to do at the Senate Conservatives Fund. It's why Jim DeMint founded us in the first place.
That's right. Now let's go now to Tennessee, where Marsha Blackburn, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, has been a rock-solid conservative in the House of Representatives. She's now taking aim at the Senate seat in Tennessee. What can you tell the listeners about that race?
Sure. So Marsha, when the House leadership was, I know, shockingly squishy on Planned Parenthood and defending life and so forth, she went out and held her own hearings on Planned Parenthood and how they were selling body parts and so forth. She did all that on her own. And that kind of independence is something we really appreciate at Senate Conservatives Fund. Of course, this is not a Democrat seat. Iran deal Bob Corker is the outgoing senator here, and outgoing is something we're very happy with as far as Bob Corker is concerned. And
good riddance.
Thankfully, President Trump is looking at undoing that Iran deal and as much as he possibly can, and he's done that now, and we'll see what further steps go there. But look, even though Tennessee is a southern state, even though Trump won it by about, if memory serves, by about 14 points, the Democrats literally found the best possible candidate here they could. It's former Governor Bredesen, who was very popular in the state when he left office in 2011. And in polling, right now, Marsha is about 2 points behind. So she really needs everybody's help to pull this one out. If the Republicans are going to gain seats in the Senate, they've got to hold Tennessee. And Marsha Blackburn would be an amazing improvement over Bob Corker in the U.S. Senate. Plus, she would be the most conservative woman in the U.S. Senate. Wouldn't that be a great addition? So we're very excited about Marcia, and she is running a good campaign, but make no mistake about it, so is the Democrat. This is going to be competitive all the way to November, so this is going to be one to watch.
Next, I want to talk about Mike Braun in Indiana. He's running against Joe Donnelly, which is a state that President Trump won, but the incumbent is a Democrat. What can you tell us about that race?
Well, and of course, this is Vice President Pence's home state. Vice President Pence's brother is actually running for one of the congressional seats here in Indiana. So there's a whole lot going on in Indiana this year. And Mike Braun is a really unique candidate. Here's a guy who is a Ivy League business school, came back home to do his business. Didn't go to New York or Chicago or Washington or whatever. He came back home, built a distribution business, trucking distribution business. He's been extremely successful, so much so that he's been able to partially fund both his primary, where he defeated two moderate leadership Republicans, both in Congress, and he has rolled into Joe Donnelly, who's scared to death. And Mike Braun is a successful businessman. He's had a short tenure in the state legislature where he has proved his mettle in voting the conservative line on virtually everything. Nobody's 100%, but he's darn close to it, and he really gives us a great chance to pick up a seat. Right now, in some polling, he actually leads Joe Donnelly by a point or two.
Wow.
Now, we've got months to go here, but Mike Braun is a great pickup opportunity in Indiana.
And it's important to note almost all of these primaries and these elections, the primaries for sure will be done by September, but the midterms in November, there will be a clear indication of whether or not we're going to have a Congress that is willing to aid President Trump in establishing a conservative agenda legislatively, or whether or not the president will be stuck continuing to do things on executive level without the aid of Congress supporting him.
Well, and we could see a situation where Republicans gain seats in the Senate. Actually, I think this is what will happen, and they lose seats in the House. So that's gonna come into play as well. But in Indiana, they're past the primary. Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn cleared the field. In West Virginia, Patrick won a very tough three-way primary, including against a Republican congressman until a few years ago had been a Democrat. So you can guess what he was like. That takes us to Michigan, which is actually, for us, for the Senate Conservatives Fund, is the last primary that's really competitive among our candidates. And John James, two-tour decorated combat veteran, conservative African-American, which is a nice bonus, businessman, successful. He joined the family business, and since he's been running it, they've added about 100 more employees. He's grown it dramatically since he came back from Iraq and the Middle East. And really a rock star. Our base really loves John James. He is fighting self-funding liberal Republican Sandy Penciller for a primary that's going to happen here literally in the next 2 weeks. The Michigan primary is August 7th.
August 7th.
And so if folks, this is one where it's literally tied. The last poll was 28-28, and you say, wait a minute, 28-28. And yes, you're hearing that right. Over 40% still undecided.
Wow.
So this is a place where, if you can give them $100 or $200 in the next week, you could really make the difference between whether we see a conservative advancing to the general election or not, to take on Debbie Stabenow, who hasn't had a hard race in her whole career. She's been there forever. And this is a state that President Trump won barely by 10,000 votes on election night in 2016. So it makes it a very competitive state, and there's a lot of reason, for instance, for President Trump to get out there and campaign for John James if he wins this nomination, because the president will be looking ahead to 2020.
That's right.
And he'd sure like to have a red line of Senate seats across that Rust Belt instead of the blue line that exists now.
That's right. Now let's talk about Missouri, where we have Democrat Senator Claire McCaskill right now. Is that right? and she's in
Yes, sir.
SCF.
And Trump won by 9 points there.
Yeah.
And SCF is behind the Attorney General there also, Josh Hawley. Josh he was doing religious liberty cases and was a Federalist Society lawyer before he ever thought about running for office. This is a guy who is one of us. He comes from the religious conservative perspective. He's been a stalwart as Attorney General, and Claire McCaskill is shaking in her boots at facing this guy. The polling is within the margin of error there. Technically, he has a primary also on August 7th, so people should go vote for him. But he has really owned that and has already been looking ahead to the general, because Claire McCaskill is one of the most vulnerable incumbents, and she is also one of the most liberal incumbents relative to her state. She does not match Missouri, and it creates a tremendous opportunity for Josh Hawley. President Trump was out there just this week helping him fundraise and pointing out why Missouri would be better served with Josh Hawley.
That is good information. Good to know. Now let's talk about Montana. Currently, we have John Tester in Montana. Does he have a viable challenger?
He has a statewide elected challenger, the state auditor there, Matt Rosendale. Matt is just a stalwart, and he won a 5-way primary back at the beginning of June, and he won it going away. I mean, he won it solidly against his competition, and all of them endorsed him the next day. He had run such a positive campaign. He never got into the slugfest with his fellow Republicans that he immediately unified everybody behind him. And in Big Sky territory out there in Montana, John Tester, again, much more liberal than his state. He is not a guy who's really hid it. You saw him attack President Trump's veterans nominee for the VA, sunk the guy with a lot of allegations that turned out not to be true. And so President Trump is pretty motivated to see Matt Rosendale beat John Tester as well. And Matt is a tested campaigner. He ran a really good state auditor race. He ran a really good primary to get to the position to take on Tester. Now, Tester has more money as one of these incumbents who's been socking it away, but we've got a great challenger in Matt Rosendale. And just like John James and Mike Braun and Patrick Morrissey and Josh Hawley and Marsha Blackburn, this would not only change the Senate, it would change the Republican caucus. It would shift the caucus substantially in the conservative principled direction if we can get Matt Rosendale elected.
I mean, and that is so key, because we're talking about not only flipping seats that were formerly held by Democrats, but even like states in Tennessee where you had Bob Corker and others, where you'll have them filled with conservatives. That's a huge factor.
Huge improvement. That's right.
Now, one more I want to talk about in Texas. Does Ted Cruz really have a viable challenger in Beto O'Rourke?
You know, his opponent, Beto O'Rourke, is in Congress, and Beto O'Rourke is running sort of the left-wing playbook. He's betting on the base, and he has raised more money. Beto O'Rourke has raised more money than all other Democrat challengers in the country combined.
Wow.
So literally Ted is an incumbent, and this challenger has already matched or passed him in money.
Wow.
With like Bernie Sanders donation support, that kind of grassroots left-wing socialist support. So right now, there was a time where where the polling was close. Ted has put a gap in here about 10 points, but the money and the environment has led us to endorse Ted. We almost never endorse incumbents. We help elect challengers, and then we leave the incumbents to do as they will. But you'll remember last year the establishment down there in Texas was talking about challenging Ted in a primary, much like they talked about with Mike Lee in Utah 2 years ago. And so we got in to support him. to help him fight off that potential. We did. And he has campaigned. You don't see this outside of Texas. He has hit every chicken barbecue and, every county fair. He is running like he's never run before, which is what we like to see with incumbents. A lot of them get sort of fat, dumb, and happy.
Yeah.
And Ted Cruz has not done that. He is taking nothing for granted, nothing.
Now, I want to leave with the last few minutes we have here. I want to talk action items. During the break, you and I were talking about not only sharing the information, but what are some steps that the listeners can take to get engaged in these midterm elections?
Well, of course, all of them need money. And whether you can donate a lot or a little, it all helps. And you can donate to all of them through our website, senateconservatives.com. And you can pick and choose between them, et cetera. But also, if you live in these states, you really need to be a leader. They need volunteers. Even if you don't have the physical ability to get out of your house, go online.
Yeah.
We fight battles on Facebook and Twitter now, and join the debate and help these folks out, and go find your friends, recruit them to engage, to donate, to volunteer. If you live in a state like, let's pick one, California, where it's socialist versus socialist, you can advance what you believe in by supporting the John Jameses of the world, by supporting the Matt Rosendales of the world, and engage in their race. Those are action items that anybody can do. No matter how much you can or can't give, you can take action of your own. And you probably know people in some of these states. Email them. Make sure they're aware of what's going on. Help turn them out. On the Jim Jordan front, the Jim Jordan for Speaker front, you can call your Republican congressman. If you don't have a Republican congressman, call one nearby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like I said, and in fact, I said earlier, call their district office and their Washington office. Mm-hmm. I would add, call their district office, call their Washington office, and call their campaign. Because a lot of people don't realize the campaign people aren't allowed to talk to the office people. So they don't necessarily share information. So call all three. Let that campaign team know that you care, as they're running for re-election, about what they're going to do in that speaker race, the first vote they're going to take before you're going to offer your unflinching support for that candidate, and that'll move you down the road of offering support. That makes a difference to them. Jim Jordan doesn't become the Speaker of the House, hear me clearly, without grassroots pressure on every congressional member in the Republican caucus. That's the only way Jim Jordan wins.
You're absolutely right. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest has been Ken Cuccinelli, president of the Senate Conservatives Fund. Their commitment is to fill Congress with particular emphasis on the Senate with not merely Republicans, but with conservatives. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ken.
Good to be with you.
All right, that's it for today's Hamilton Corner, but you don't want to miss the next episodes. God bless you all.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.